So, Jack, how in the heck are you, and what have you been up to, and what's new in your world?
Well, I was up at 3 o'clock in the morning with a broken pipe to one of the toilets, and
Oh
we
my
had to
gosh.
mopping the floor. We're still waiting on the plumbers. Um, Outside of that, having had no sleep last night, there's not much else going on in Lake Wobegon. Um, we're still waiting on the plumbers to show up. I can't even get down to look at it. I'm so lame, with this a broken hip. Um, I can't even I can't even get down to take a look at it. But uh,
So,
evidently, there's a broken pipe connection between the supply line to the one of the toilets, and water leaking. We had to mop water at 3 o'clock in the morning out of the hallway, and also the downstairs has got a good dose of water. So right now the water is shut off in the house, and we're waiting on the plumbers.
all right. Well, now, Jack, remind me, when you worked for the Northern Pacific, how close were you to Lake Wobegon? Wasn't that just down the road from you?
Well, yeah, it should have been. Uh, yeah, it was would have been on the line from Little Falls to Morris. Uh, we plowed that damn thing 7 times in the spring of '69 to keep it open. Now it's a bike trail, so there you are, Uh, but yeah, I've got some nice photographs of the Bros snowplow and 10-foot drifts on that Little Falls, Dakota line.
Didn't you write about that tale of plowing that in your book, which is available
Yeah,
at
I've
the
got a thing in
NPRHE
the book, and
store?
there's some pretty good photographs too. There's Joe Donovan standing on 10 feet of snow, and we're digging a Jeep out of a snowbank there. There was snow up to the number lights. Uh, we finally dragged that thing out. Uh, those were 16-hour days too. I don't know
All
if you could
right,
even
before
get
the hours of service laws changed, right?
you can't even get guys to do that sort of thing nowadays. It's just those St. Paul division guys were wonderful. Uh, you could rely on them when things got really tough. But yeah, that I was kind of in charge of that Bros plow. We made, I think we made 7 trips down that branch line to keep it open.
Wow, interesting.
Yeah,
Just an update, folks, on our program. Normally, we'd be starting our program right now. Our special guest this week, George Lee, is having some technical difficulties. And so once we get George in the house, and it looked like to me that he's logging in as we speak, then we'll get this show on the road. So we're at 101, and I'm like double fingers crossed with a lucky rabbit foot that George is actually going to make this. So I am going to start our meeting. Hi, everybody. I'm Jonathan Fisher from the Pacific Northwest Railroad Archive and Cascade Rail Foundation. And today is our biweekly PNRA biweekly Zoom meeting of April 9th, 2025. And fingers crossed, everybody, that our special guest is in the process of logging in as we speak, and we will have a very interesting
Jonathan,
presentation. What
Jonathan, can you hear me?
I can. Is that you, George?
Yes, but you won't get video from me, but you will. I can do the presentation. I think we're okay.
You can be able to share your screen, okay?
Let me try 2 seconds. You won't get video from me, but
Let me make sure that oops, host tools. Share screen is enabled.
hold on. I have to download. Give me a second. I have to download the presentation from Dropbox and then
Okay.
save it and then do it.
All right. So in the meantime, George, while you're working in the background, I need to let me go over the news with everybody.
Okay.
Okay. So then, and then you can like text me when you're ready, and then we'll segue over to you. How does that sound? Sounds like a plan to me. So anyway, back to live action. Thanks everybody for being here.
That works for me. Thanks.
Okay. So text me when you're ready. Um, so in
Got
the
it.
meantime, um, back to live action. April 23rd, our next meeting after this meeting will be Russell Holter, Pacific Northwest Railroad Archive Board Chairman and founder of Cascade Rail Foundation. And he's going to be doing a
That's the
presentation
cover. Can I talk to them?
he's going to be doing a presentation on the formation of Cascade Rail Foundation. Our next meeting will be May 7th. Just a second. Yeah, I'm in a meeting. It's okay. Always something today. So hang on here for George. I'm not ready for you yet. So May 7th, we have Dr. Frank Shear from the Railway Mail Service is going to be here. And Dr. Shear's program will be recorded for presentation during this time slot. May 21st, Roy Gelder, retired vice president of the Southern Pacific Railroad, will be doing a presentation on the Golden State Route on the Rock Island and the redevelopment of that. June 4th, Robert Scott will be our guest. Robert is involved in the rail fan cameras around the Pacific Northwest, not only Centralia, Chehalis, where he got started, but also in Ritzville and in Centennial, Washington at the Amtrak Depot. And then on June 18th, our final program for this season, for this until we're going to take a summer break. June 18th, Bob Kelly, past president of the Pacific Northwest Railroad Archive, board president, will be doing a presentation on how to publish a railroad book. So just like last week when we had Craig Thorpe, how to create a painting, Bob will be doing how to create a book. So that is our schedule of Zoom programs from now till our summer break. And then this Saturday, live, Cascade Rail Foundation and the Pacific Northwest Railroad Archive are going to be doing a live stream capture presentation with Frank Zellerhoff on Pier 27, which it was the Milwaukee Roads ocean-going portal to port towns in Canada, so on and so forth. Frank worked on the docks, remembers how it all worked. It's got just a number of great stories. It's going on YouTube right now. Last week's program was on Vashon Island, and that is going online as we speak. So you'll be able to watch that. And of course, this program will be going online on YouTube later today. So now, George, are you ready? George, can you unmute?
Let's find out if I am ready.
Okay. All right. So let me unpin myself. I've done that. George has got his screen shared. Here we go. All right, ladies and
Wonderful.
gentlemen, if we could all just, I'm even the host and I'm even going to mute. So I'm muted and I'm turning it over to George. And George, I'm glad you've made it so far. Take it.
My name is George. I am one of the volunteers and one of the key people in the Cheney Depot Society. So before I start the presentation, I want to talk a little bit about myself, how I got into trains, just a quick little thing. My grandfather worked on steam locomotives in China, and my grandmother built freight car wheels in China as well. So I have very, very good family that has allowed me to get into trains. I went to Eastern for college, and there's not much to do in a college town, but there are railroads, and there's lots of that. So I took up photography, and now I currently shoot with a Sony RX10 IV, which is my current camera. I'll share 3 photos from some trips I've taken over the years. This one's in Mongolia. Nice little passenger train out to Russia. Kind of a fun little deal. That was a great trip for me. It was lots of photos, lots of good fun. Then I went right before COVID to see the last of mainline steam in China really is. This was one of the better photos, phenomenal photos. We were the second to last group that made it because the last group got stuck there during COVID, so we got pretty lucky, and I got good photos from that. And then another Mongolia picture. Never go wrong with something like this. Even the Russians find a way to pour smoke on a diesel. It's not just Alco, so lots of fun. All right, now the Cheney Depot Society. So 2014 to 2025, which has been around for 11 years, and the future. So the Northern Pacific Railroad sort of occupied the town like the late 1870s in that time frame, and the name was chosen as the town was because named after a board member who had the last name of Cheney, and that's how the town started. Cheney at the time was another important place for freight, for passenger, from really the Spokane all the way out to the Tri-Cities. And it was one of the slightly large areas where you could have a small yard and that type of stuff. So it had a lot of interesting facilities there. Not anything really for steam, but really just a place for crew changes, that kind of thing. First depot was built there in 1881. So they had a depot in town shortly after the town was founded. And then oddly, the first schoolhouse that was built there was also sponsored by the Northern Pacific Railroad, and that eventually turned into the university, which is home now of the Eastern Eagles. So here's a look at a photo of the first depot, courtesy of the Minnesota Historical Society. You can tell it's got a more sort of a standard building architecture with the two roofs and that sort of a deal. Here's a better photo to look at one. You can see sort of where the freight platform is in this photo and that type of a thing. Depot by 1929 was showing its age. Buildings were 8 to 40 years old, and especially in that time period, a lot of those buildings just were sort of getting, I don't want to say out of date, but they are just kind of, because, are just getting old. And really, building at the time, like, we don't have the modern technologies now to where buildings last forever. At the time, it was, really, sort of took a lot of work to build. This is an example of a schoolhouse that the Northern Pacific Railroad had built in Cheney. And this is what started what would eventually become the Eastern Washington University. This one was shipped in from Newport, Washington to remember the history of the university and those that are involved. So kind of a neat photo. All right, let's talk about Governor Martin. Governor Martin, who was also mayor of Cheney, was one of the few people to hold both positions at the same time in our state. Was born in 1886 and graduated from the University of Washington in 1906. So he's a local kid out of the Cheney area, went to college, and after he graduated, he joined his dad's sort of grain and milling company, which at the time was the largest in the state. His dad also founded the first creamery in Eastern Washington in the state, located in Cheney as well. And then he became mayor in 1928, served 3 terms, and then became state governor for 2 terms from 32 to 1940. So one of the few people that got to do both duties at once, and he would frequently travel between the 2 locations often. So why did we need a new depot? 2 things. The mayor at the time, Mr. Martin, wanted more commercial enterprise. And if the depot didn't look good, people didn't really want to stop there and do business because they thought this town was really not a good place to be. The depot sort of represented the cornerstone of what is essentially the what would be essentially the view that you would get as you're coming into town. At the time, that was the big building in town. And then the MP was like, "Well, I don't really want to spend money and build a depot. I mean, the depot works just fine, right, man? Like, what's the deal?" So mayor, being that he was mayor, he said, "Okay, if you don't build a new depot, then I'll take all my business that I have, the grain, the whatever else was in town, and I'll truck it to Spokane and ship it with somebody else." So the NPR agreed, and at a cost of $25,000, they let Mayor Martin choose sort of the design. Here's a drawing from the GNRHS and NPR Joint Archives showcasing the original blueprints of the building. And this was used by us initially to get a lot of measurements and things, just general details that we could use for future, not only building of the depot, but all the details that have to come with the depot. Here's a look at the depot, relatively new. You notice the baggage cart up front. This is a 1929 photo, Cheney Historical Museum photo. Spanish inspired design with the two arches. Um, that's really unique. There's only really 2 or 3 depots outside of the Southwest that are designed like that, and Mayor Martin chose that probably for its uniqueness because he wanted something that few people had outside the Southwest. Stucco walls with a red tile roof and brick under the arches. This again is a Southwest style depot feature. If you look at the Santa Fe and some of the others, they had them, but he wanted something unique that would attract people, and certainly having a Spanish style depot would certainly attract. And then we had station signs on all 4 sides, and we hosted the main line, so that's Spokane to Tri-Cities, and then we hosted the Central Washington, or the CW branch, out to Coulee City. Here's a photo in the late MP era from Charles Muchler, who was a university archivist at Eastern and was big into trains as well. We'll talk about him in a little bit. Here's a look inside the depot. Here you'll notice that there are there's a clock, and above the clock it showcases which direction the semaphore is pointing so that the operator knew which lever to pull when he needed to pull them. And then this is a railroad safe that was used at the time. We do have one of these currently under restoration for the depot, so it will likely sit similar to a place where it will sit somewhere for display, and it will be probably painted up just to look just like that. Here's a look at a telephone. They had headphones, they had telephones, and they had all kinds of other primitive communication technology. And so here's a look. Charles got to take a photo of that specific setup and just the operator's desk. Because of the train order operation, right? So you had to have 2 semaphore blades essentially on 1 pole. So these are the levers that the operator would have had to pull to operate the semaphores based on the direction. Here's a look at the ticketing office. Not anything super fancy, just it's pretty standard ticketing office. And then here's a look at the train board. This would have told you what trains are running to where, what time, and you would have figured out when your train was running. And that's how this goes. Here's a photo we have of Class W3 Mikado, built in 1920 by Alco Brooks, passing by the depot. Steam was a big part in this part of and they saw a lot of steam locomotives from Spokane to the Tri-Cities. And most of the photos come further east in Marshall Canyon, where you saw a lot of the big Challengers from the SP&S and some other bigger locomotives. But Cheney did have its fair share of large locomotives. I'm not sure when this photo was taken or what the locomotive was, but here's a freight passing the depot. My guess is the 40s, and the locomotive had a Vanderbilt tender. So let me go back. So I'm hazarding a guess. It's probably somewhere in the 40s. CW branch, which is the branch out of Coulee City, ran with a motor car. It wouldn't have enough traffic on it to really justify a full steam train, so they ran with a motor car. This one It came from Wade from the Milwaukee Road Historical Association. This is 1953. And then when the motor car was not available, they would run a Pacific, usually a light Pacific, some kind like that, with one baggage car and one passenger car to substitute for the motor car. Service ended in early 1954 on the CW branch for passengers. Harry Truman, the great Harry Truman, got to visit the depot. He was paying a visit to the Grand Coulee Dam, which was built in the late 40s, early 50s. And after he had visited, he needed to make a call to the then governor to tell him how great he thought it was. And the closest location that had a real depot that could call the governor at the time was in Cheney. So he made a pit stop, and there's a photo of him coming out of the depot or in the depot shortly after the photo was taken. Steam was replaced by diesels in the 50s and 60s. And here's a photo of the depot with some F units and likely a Jeep on a westbound freight. And then after MP had run it towards the BN era, they still had local freight service, even though passenger service was long gone on the CW branch. So they kept a caboose there for operations. And normally a Great Northern caboose was stationed here at all times for the local freight servicing needed. When BN got the depot, they painted it green initially to match all their other paint schemes, which is green and white. And then later, they repainted it back into the historical scheme, which is what we have on it now. But here's a photo of it in the BN green with the train order boards both in the up position. Here's another photo from the BN era, SD40, SD45 with TOSC trailers westbound out of town. This scene looks largely the same. Today. The telephone poles may have been gone and some of the grass may have been cut, but it is largely the same. Here's a photo, a little older photo showcasing an MP Jeep and other units at the depot with a 40-foot boxcar. This photo is probably early BN because the 40-foot boxcar likely has the MP logo on it, so it's likely pretty early. Jeep 40, BN ran all kinds of stuff down to the Tri-Cities, and they ran SDs, Jeeps, and anything else you can find. So here's a photo of a Jeep 40 passing with a westbound freight. Very rarely did we get Alcos up in this part of the BN territory. At least the road switchers, they were either relegated to the Midwest area or they were relegated, if they were the SPNS ones, they were relegated down in the gorge. But this is a rare photo of an MP RS3 that is likely being moved somewhere. And its original number is 858 and the BN number is 4082. ST45 is leading a freight train here. It has to stop. It has to comply with a stop order. And then to the right are MOW bunk cars. By this time, the depot had largely been freight, and MOW was taking up a good chunk of space too. Passenger service had largely ended in the 70s and really the 80s. The Empire Builder, the section that goes from Spokane to Portland, passes by the depot. This is a Tom Hillenbrand photo from 1985. And then here's another freight photo from 1980 showcasing a Jeep, what looks to be a 9 in the BN scheme, passing by the depot. After BNSF got it, the depot largely served as a storage facility and also was used by MOW for a little bit of time. This is a photo probably in the 90s, early 2000s of a Santa Fe unit passing by with a train. And then towards the end, in like 13 and 14, here are some photos that I've taken over the years showcasing the depot sort of in its state. One of the cool things that happened with the depot specifically is that when students would get off the train, they'd walk directly towards the university in what is called Showalter Hall, which you can still see today, and the road still exists today. And when you go up there, they usually just, that's how they return, because the depot at the time and Showalter Hall would face each other. So you would be able to see the depot from the university and vice versa. And this is how they walked up to university back in the 20s, 30s, really up until the end of passenger service for the depot. Passenger service ended in 71. Freight service lasted till the 80s. And obviously BNSF has used it for storage, but MOW moved away in the early 2000s. They now have a separate shed just down the road from where this depot is now. This photo is an eastbound freight, and the GN caboose that is used for the local is still parked there. So how did it all get started? Well, the city got an application that they wanted to demolish the building. It basically was taking up space in the area, and it was costing them money, taxes, that kind of stuff. And they're like, look, I don't have any use for the building. It's too old. Why don't we get rid of it? Well, somebody, one of our board members, found out the city was doing it and leaked it to the Cheney Free Press, which is a local newspaper. And they run a story saying, hey, the BNSF wants to, demolish the building. And a small group of people, me included, we decided we were going to form the first meeting in the Cheney Public Library and come up with a group that would allow us to preserve the building. And I created the social media page shortly after the first meeting to essentially say, hey, we exist as an organization, and this is what we intend to do. We had to talk about Dr. Pete Hansen for 2 seconds. This man is instrumental in our ability to really do what we're doing today. This guy is a doctor out of Alaska. He's very wealthy, and his family tree dates back to Cheney in the Depression era, so 29 to like 30, like late 20s, early 30s. And when he found out that we were going to preserve the building, he agreed to a 1-to-1 match up to $500,000, which meant if I raised $500,000, he would give the other $500,000 to get to $1 million. And for those of you that have been in preservation, you'll know that money is hard to come by. And if somebody is up to donating that kind of money, you say yes to the terms as much as you can, and you take it where possible. So before we created a 501c3, in order to accept donations, we had to have somebody else get the money and then let us spend it. So the Southwest Spokane County Historical Society agreed to let us agreed to accept the donations for us until we could set up a 501c3. And then we also enlisted the help of Eastern Washington University to help us with initial study drawings and initial planning for a lot of the stuff. One of the great things about Charles Mutchler being a university archivist, he had contacts all over the university, and he really tapped into the community aspect of this to say, hey, how can the community help us, right? Develop a plan that will eventually serve the community, right? Because the goal is the depot needs to serve the community as much as it is to preserve the history. And if we let the community be involved early, then it'll be a community thing. And when it's done, it'll be the way we want it, which is to preserve history and support the community. Charles Mutchler was a big model railroader in real thing. He actually had quite a large narrow gauge Denver and Rio Grande narrow gauge layout when he died. And he died in a car crash, sadly, so he did not get the chance to see the end of the project. But he was instrumental in getting us access to Eastern Washington University and their various staff and people that could help us do this project in the initial phases. The important part was we needed to have initial logos, drawings, the kind of stuff, the research, the sort of thing that a university student in a finals project could really do well. And that for us was critical because we didn't have all necessary experience in that. We come from different fields, and tapping into their expertise was great for us. So business plan had to describe how we could be self-sustaining and how it will preserve its history and the students presented various different scenarios to us and gave us different like location ideas, that kind of stuff, and why it's beneficial and the kind of business that go in it. And we took those as the initial steps to determining where a depot will be located. Here was an early conceptual drawing that somebody had put together, not to scale, but just an early idea of what a depot might look at, type of deal. And this was used to sort of kind of showcase a future, like, hey, this is what it looks like. Was not We have not yet determined, what kind of a location it was going to be in or anything like that. But at the time, this was sort of how we were going to show it. 2015 in the spring, we had an open house where we told people we exist. Hey, we're looking for volunteers. We're moving along. We're trying to just get some support and that type of a deal. And so for us, this is what allowed us to exist and to showcase to the public what we were doing. Tom Davis, the photo on the left, showed us a telegraph machine that he had. He since moved to Texas, but at the time he was living here and he worked for the MP, and he showed that off as part of the open house. So BNSF, we started talking with them in 2015. We got permission to do a site walkthrough to see the condition, to just see, how good of a shape is the building. Because if it's beyond help, then, there's one thing. If it's helpable, if we can, fix it, and get it done, then great. But if we can't, then we cannot, right? So we need to know what condition it's in. We also started talking with structural engineers. We're like, okay, if we're going to move the building, does it need to be moved in one piece, two piece, three pieces? What's the ideal? Obviously, if you can move it in one piece, that keeps the building's integrity, keeps the history all together. But we also didn't know where we were going yet, so we were trying to figure out, okay, what does it look like to do one piece? What does it look like to do the two piece? What does it look like for the three? So we were looking at various different ways to sort of make it happen. Couple of photos I took while we were walking through the building, exterior, interior, and that sort of a thing. And the fire hose is still there after all those many years, and some of the light fixtures are still there. And surprisingly, the original train order board that showed when the trains left was still there. In the boiler room, back in the day, you had boiler for heat. That room was still there, although flooded. So a lot of the original stuff is still there. The signs are largely they're there, but the station signs have rotted away so much that we knew we had to make new station signs. Okay, here's the criteria for us regards to the site. So the site had to be easy public access, which meant it had to be parking available, had to be room for that kind of a thing for people to get to. Preferably, we like it by the tracks. Being a railroad depot, it's nice to be next to the tracks so that people can view the trains. Access by public transit is preferred, like if it's easy to be accessed by bus, because Cheney is not right downtown Spokane. It is slightly outside of downtown, and so for those reasons, we had to have it. We would like to have it easy access by public transit. City center. So one of the other things was that the building needed to be able to be near city center so that we could provide basically another attraction to the city's downtown area to help grow. And then finally, we're talking about potential growth, right? So meaning that if we need to expand, like we either add a freight car or two, or we wanted to add a water tower or something else, like another building, we wanted potential for growth. And if you didn't leave enough room, then you're kind of stuck in the size you are and you don't have room for expansion. One of the things too is that you have to preserve the depot for generations to come, and expansion may help with that. Okay, first location we looked at was right downtown, called First and G Street. It was a neat location because it was right in the parking lot and it was right downtown. It had limited views of the railroad, but it had some view, and we thought this might have worked. Second location was a little ways out of downtown, called Cheney Plaza Road. was a neat location. This one actually had nice access to view the trains, but was not really close to downtown. It was still a little ways out, and was also not really that close to a bus stop. Like, it was close, but it was like, a little bit of a challenge to get there. Third location was in the city center place, which was very close to where First and, which was a block down from where it was at First and G, some of the other locations. And this one is great, but again, with the First and G, similar problems. Views of the trains were limited, and it was very downtown, and it was also conveniently very close to the bars, so we were not sure that was a great attraction in that part of town. And then finally, we thought the fourth location was Highway 904 North, which was right next to the main road through town, and it was next to a railroad track, or a short line. It was next to it. However, the problems there largely stem from building in a swamp. Building in a swamp is very, very difficult and expensive. And if you don't do it right, the building will not sit properly. So ultimately, we decided that one was really a go, strictly because of the fact that it was sitting in a swamp, and we just didn't want to deal with the hassles having to build in that kind of territory. So then we got a logo together. Okay, we worked with the Eastern's Visual Communication Department to develop a logo, and the logo had to remember the past while looking at the future. So we're saving the depot, but we got to talk about the past too, right? You got to focus on the depot and its past while looking at the future. And this, again, is a community involvement thing, right? Everything has to be done by community involvement. So we have to do it in this fashion. Here's a look at 4 logo designs that were submitted to us. The one on the bottom left was a very close second because it showcased the key features of the depot, had the nice, Save Our Station Cheney Depot thing, was very nicely done. But ultimately, we chose this logo as the way to go for us. And the reason we picked this is, one, because the color scheme matched sort of the monad on the MP, had the SOS symbol, plus it had a real much better replica of the depot in there. So the combination is sort of, the colors, the history, plus all the words, it just made sense for us. January 2016, we did the first newsletters. Those that came out, and the newsletters are still available on our website, cheneydepot.com. So that was wonderful for us. The next steps, we took the 3 sites we looked at. We started to look at, okay, environmental needs, right? We're researching, the history, like what are we, who was there before, what are the problems we're going to have if we build there, that kind of stuff. We also started looking at grants. When you do depots, 500 grand is great as a donation, but you need money as well. So we're looking at grants. And then finally, we started kind of drawing up a rough exterior of the photo, kind of do an idea of, okay, what does a depot look like? Okay, what do we want to do? How are we going to place it? And in those meetings, there were some very heated discussions about a lot of this stuff, which is what you expect. But we were having good discussion, and then we moved forward with sort of kind of trying to, progress it forward. And I got to tell you, the beginning stages, discussing the various sites and things, that took quite a bit of time, and we really didn't know what we were doing, but we were just plugging along one step at a time. All right. First and Union Street. This is an interesting location. It was not on our radar at all, not even available to us. We didn't even know it existed, didn't know anything about that time. But the landscaping company that was there, that had specialized in fill material, they suddenly vacated the property and was moving to a site that was slightly larger. They needed more space, so they moved to a slightly bigger. And it was also owned by a Union Oil distributorship a long, long time ago. And when they moved out, it was offered for donation by the owners of the Sunshine Investment Group. And they offered it to us because they had heard about us doing it and said, well, what about this location? We donate it. Well, the problem we didn't know is that because of its prior ownership at Union Oil, it had underground tanks. And the EPA and the Washington State Department of Ecology doesn't like that when you have to build, because that means soil remediation, the whole deal. Essentially, it meant if we did it, it would be very, very expensive for us. And And we had to really think about that before we accepted the donation, because if we couldn't get past the soil remediation problem, we were going to be basically involved in that for years and years to come. And unfortunately for us, that would mean a lot of money. But we'll talk about how we got around that later, but we eventually found a way. So why did this location make sense? A, it was close to its original location, which meant it didn't have to move the depot that far. Moving the depot far costs money, right? So the shorter you move it, the less money it costs. Two, it was very close. It was right next door to the BNSS Lakeside Subdivision, which is the main line from Spokane to Tri-Cities, and that sees, probably 24 trains a day. And then close by, because Cheney was a railroad town, Union Pacific went by a little ways down as well. So you got access to two railroads, one town. Voila, right? Being a railroad depot, you wanted to be next to the tracks, and this solved that problem. Finally, it was close to downtown. It was much closer to downtown than the Cheney Plaza location, and this allowed us to be essentially an extension of downtown, and we thought that whatever we did in it, it would benefit the overall expansion. And then finally, it's close to public transit. Believe it or not, the bus stop was only a block away, so that was wonderful too. And it was just a byproduct. Now, the bus stop thing, you're not really thinking about, but knowing that a bus stops there now, that's perfect. And then finally, room for expansion, right? We were on a very large property, and we actually bought the property right next door to it at 22 I Street just to expand the property a little bit so that we could have more space on the depot. Okay, so here's a look at the depot location. Here's a look at the bus stop. You'll notice the bus stop is very close to where the depot is and within walking distance, very much walking distance. It was within walking distance of the other depot at Cheney Plaza, but the problem was that this location is much closer to downtown. And then downtown is over there, and the university is over there. So again, very close to all the things that mattered in Cheney, which is downtown and the university. In 2016, December, we started filming a promo video at the depot. We got permission from the railroad to film, so a film crew set up, and we paid some money, had a promo done. That's on our YouTube page, which is the only video on there. Currently, there has not been anything else published on there yet, but there will be later. We hosted Murder on the Orient Express with Stage West Theater and Marketplace Deli in Spokane as their first fundraising event. We did a few fundraisers over the time to sort of raise money, but a lot of it was really through soliciting through private donors and just people that we knew we could rely on to provide a certain amount of money. We contracted with a company called Tetra Tech to do the Phase 1 environmental assessment, and we finally had to get rid of those septic tanks that were underground. So the state ecology allowed us to build there if we did not touch any of the soil that was contaminated. And since the land was sitting significantly lower than street level, we had to add fill to get it up to street level. And the addition of the fill was insignificant enough that they agreed to let us pass the environmentals without having to dig, because I had to raise it by so many inches, and they deemed that that was enough to satisfy the oil tanks that were under there. We had engineering done for the sign. We had all kinds of other engineering done by Mr. Jeff Mitchell from Kaufman Engineering. We finally got the reviews required to remove the existing buildings and basically just raise the whole place. And then finally, we were given building permits in September of 2018. We did a land survey. We paid for half the land survey. The other company called Parametrics did the other half. We finished finally the environmental liability, made sure we satisfied the Department of Ecology stuff. All that's finally done. And then we accepted the donation of the property officially. Once the BNSF had agreed to donate the building to us, we accepted the donation of the property. And there's a photo from left to right. The Hansons on the left. John Taves is in the middle, third from the left. And then our president at the time, board president, Charles Mutcher, and then Gary and Sue Gieske, who owned the property there at First and Union Street. We again, community involvement, it's big for us. So one of the Eagle Scouts, his project was to build a station sign for us to basically put the future home building on there. And so again, we partnered with him to allow him to donate to build the sign and put it there so that they know that this is our future home. There were two buildings, there were two properties on our current location. One is a big barn shed thing, the other is this house. And the house had to go, and instead of raising it, we allowed the fire department to do a mock, what they call a controlled burn, so they can do some training on it while we were before we raised it down. So we made sure the asbestos was clean, and we removed all of that stuff, and then we let the fire department burn it down to the ground, and then we cleaned up after the fact. Again, community involvement is big for us, right? So for those of us here, right, involving the community is a big deal. All right, the big news. Okay, so we applied for the Heritage Capital Grant from the Washington State Historical Society, and the grant requires us to be matched 2-1 by local funding sources. So we got the first of 2 or 3 batches of this money to help with moving the building and just all the things needed to do the building, to essentially move the building down the street. Terry Morning, who not only works for the city of Cheney, but also has his own business, donated his services of an existing building study, so where he measured all the rooms, right, noted what materials were in them, all the finishes, so that when we go back to do the interior, we know what's in them, what's not in them, the whole deal, so that we know what we need to do to maintain its historical accuracy and authenticity. Then we contract with Dell Davis and DB Davis in 2020 to move the building. And they determined that we can move the building in one piece. And we're like, cool. We're like, if we can move it in one piece, and that saves us a lot of money, and it keeps the historical accuracy of the whole building. And then we signed with Walker Construction for project management and construction services. And they have done other historical buildings in Spokane before, so this was not new to them. So they knew exactly what they had to do. So in January 2020, during the middle of winter, we removed all the stuff that we could from the building, and that's windows, doors, and clay roofs and all kinds of stuff. And surprisingly, we discovered an additional pallet of clay roof tiles in the attic that were original and not touched. And those got put to good use, replacing the broken ones that were on the depot. Here's a photo of the bricks that we took out of the ground, and then we palleted them up, and then the additional red tile roofs that we found in the attic. Surprisingly, despite having been there for over 60, 70 years, they were still in good shape remarkably. Jack Gillingham, one of the local businessmen, donated a lot of earth to help with, the site prep. And then DB Davis completed 6 weeks of site prep for moving the depot essentially to the new location. So we had to tear down the other building, which is the big shed, and this office building. And so here's some photos of us, of the work party that ended up removing all the buildings here. And then the big site prep required putting these giant beams on to stabilize the building while moving, and DP Davis was doing all of that stuff as well. And then finally getting the whole building together, and then getting the truck that was going to do the pole set up as well. That happened as well. And here's the site prep. All right, now we get to June 2020, and we're getting ready to move the depot to its new location. Wonderful photographer Brian, I happened to tell him that the depot was being moved, and he came down and took a few photos. This is a great photo he took because it's got a BN painted SD40-2 passing by the depot that had served in the BN era, with a fitting tribute sort of to the end of the depot in its current location. And then there's a photo of them getting ready to pull the building shortly after the building was pulled. The day we moved, they shut the railroad down for a few hours, and they moved it across the tracks, and a lot of people came out and paid visit. I had a friend of mine set up a live stream for us, and he got to talk to Bruce Butler, to Dr. Hansen, and there's a lot of great interviews that happened with that. So that was most wonderful. Here are some more Brian photos, and people were out in force, lawn chairs, the whole deal, to just think about the fact that a building that had been such a staple in town is now going to get preserved and saved, and really, it's quite wonderful. And then some more photos. A lot of people took photos. The guy on the right is Chris Thompson. He brought out a drone to take some photos, which we'll look at in a minute. And then this is a great photo because it's got the classic arches passing by the main sort of crossing in town called Mill Street. And then all these people on the other side were paying attention and watching it go by and just taking the video. And quite really a feat to think about. But at this point, we have been 6 years in a project, and we're now finally starting to see some big progress that'll hopefully help us get there. Here's Chris Thompson's drone photos from the day. Quite wonderful photos. I mean, really well done. The wide angle view is wonderful, but this shows what are the photo of the depot preparing to be moved down the street. So then they had to turn the depot. One of the reasons we wanted to turn the depot was because the end that normally faced the railroad side was no longer any train serving it, and that was going to be the side that we wanted to show the history on, which is the operator's desk, the semaphores, the whole deal. And we just knew that if we didn't turn it around, the railroad would never let us access that side of the building without safety concerns. So we turned the building around to face the street so that we could have access to the historical part of the building, the operator's desk, and without interfering with railroad operations. Obviously, as is the case, right, we're trying to do what we have to do in preserving the history while also not annoying the BNSF, which can get very annoyed very easily. Then afterwards they had to pour the foundation. So DBD went away, contractors poured the foundation, and then we lowered the foundation. We lowered the building onto the foundation, and then we lowered the building onto the foundation. They removed all the cribbing, and the building was officially moved into its new location by about July, August 2020. Okay, in January 2021, Dr. Hansen unexpectedly passes away from, was not mentioned to me what he died from, but his family chips in an additional $200,000 in his honor because this was a big project in his life. He felt he had invested a lot of time and effort and money into this, and his family recognized the importance of this to him, and to honor his legacy, they donated an extra $200,000, which we are grateful for. See, money like this doesn't come around. If you do it right, you get all kinds of donations in, and it winds up working out in your favor. We are finally listed on the Cheney Register of Historical Places, and we also completed the roof tile and the stucco repair in the summer of 2021. Here's a look at a photo of the roof tile repair happening in the summer of 2021. And then here's a look at the stucco repair that we did and what it looked like when it was done. We also painted the depot, just patched up some of the holes and that kind of thing, because there was a lot of graffiti on the building from all these years of sitting dormant, and we patched up some of that stuff too. By this time, we had spent about just a little over $750,000. We had 240 families and individuals and businesses provide money. We got another $305,000 from this Heritage Capital grant, so the second of the three. And then we got money from the Venus Historic Society, the Avista Foundation, and the MPRHA for very specific items of restoration, such as windows, doors, and that type of a thing. Here's a photo from one of three donations the Avista Foundation made, one of which was for brand new doors, which I will showcase in a little bit. And then we did another fundraiser at golf courses. Now, the thing you got to know about golf courses is that if somebody's paying $100 for a round of golf, another $10 for a t-shirt, it's not going to matter, right? If you spend $100 playing a round of golf, $10 seems like chump change. So we did a little bit of fundraising, sort of a few shirts and that kind of thing for another little fundraiser. Rolling into 2022, Russell Holter joins the group. He's the wonderful PNRHA board president, and he and his company of Cultural Renaissance, we do develop a history interpretation plan. Basically, how do we want to present the history in the depot? It's got a lot of gray history, as I've already mentioned, but how do we show it to the general public that's coming in, or even the people that are just coming in for just the building? How do we showcase it? And then we finally did plumbing. We did heat pumps, the whole deal, electrics, all that stuff. We added ADA bathrooms. We added fire sprinklers. And in fact, this week we're finishing the final testing of the fire sprinkler system to make sure it works, and we're getting signed off by the fire department, hopefully by the end of the month. Here are some photos of the install happening in the bathrooms and the sprinkler installs. Semaphore. The depot had a train order board which had been there forever. However, train order boards are a little harder to come by these days in preservation. A semaphore is a little easier. Somebody in one of the groups on Facebook listed that they had a semaphore available, two of them actually, and I immediately reached out. This guy's name is Scott. I forget his last name. I reached out to him and had said that, hey, if you have one, I would love to send you the money and reserve one for the Depot Society. If you could please, that'd be great. So we went out to Yakima in the summer of 22, and we went and picked up the semaphore. When the semaphore came, the blade did not exist. So the blade did not exist, and the glass that represented the spectacles was also very much broken pieces. So I had to order new spectacles, and I actually bought two train order boards and then converted them using drawings from GRS into essentially semaphore blades, and then custom painted it with that. My friend Ed helped me with this whole project. Here's a couple of photos from Brian. We're loading the semaphore onto the back. The gentleman here is Phil Martin. He actually there was a part of this semaphore that he had liked, and he said, if you give me this piece, I will move the whole thing for you. So we took him up on the offer, and the part that he gave was a light that was on the semaphore that was used for when speeders came by, they would be able to see there's a semaphore there. And since we're just displaying it as strictly the semaphore, that part was not needed necessarily for the operation, so we let him have it, and he agreed to move it for us. There was also a switch stand too. So Scott had donated a switch stand to Phil, and Phil didn't want the switch stand, so he asked if we wanted it, and we said sure, so we took it. And in the right photo, Harley is there unloading the switch stand with a couple of young guys, and I get a feeling he may be working a little too hard, but we'll see about that. So then Dan had telegraph poles for us. One of the other things too was telegraph pole wire would be nice, because in the 20s that was the more method of communication. So we went out to his house and we grabbed a telegraph pole, and also a very rare wood crossbuck. Wood crossbucks are not around anymore, and the fact that Dan had one on property and was gracious enough to donate it to us is wonderful. Again, wonderful photos from Brian to showcase the deal. So then we did more electrical, more plumbing in 2022. There's more of the updates to make the building essentially proper and all. And then we were pouring the concrete inside in 2022 as well. Just pouring the whole concrete inside the building as well in that same time. And then in this time frame, we enlisted the help of the university, again, student volunteers from the football team, from the volleyball team, to come help out with some site prep, plus with moving the doors and the windows for restoration. Shockingly, all the windows and all the doors are there, but the doors, we needed to do new doors because the existing doors were just not energy efficient and did not really meet building code, but all of the windows were original, so we preserved those. Here's a couple of photos of us. One of the local organizations in Cheney allowed us to operate out of their leased office space in downtown Cheney to work on essentially cleaning up the windows and also painting the doors as well. So we were gracious enough to take them up on that, and we set up shop inside the building in downtown to paint the windows and also do the doors. Here's a look at one of the windows that was finished, and some more work on the windows. The doors. The Avista Foundation provided the grant that allowed us to buy the energy efficient doors. The one on the left is what it looks like, and the one on the right is completed. After they were done, the city of Cheney had a storage facility. They were gracious to allow us to store the doors until they were ready for installation, and the doors were installed last winter, 2024. Lights. About 2024 or so, we started putting in lights for the outside of the depot. We made sure the furniture matched to the style of the 20s and the 30s, and we did some wonderful work, and there are some great things. And then also, right around summer to late, we put in the windows, and window installations and that type of a deal, because the windows got done. So late summer, we started putting those in. The door went in right around Thanksgiving or so of 2024. So that brings us to what's happening now. Well, so Dr. Hansen's wife came down during Thanksgiving to see family, and while she was there, she wanted a tour of the depot. So we obviously said yes, we give you a tour of the depot. Kind of told her how it's progressing, and then she said that she would provide. She said that she would donate a certain amount of money to be to be wired into the account, in a few weeks. And it turned out to be $290,000, which was great because at the time we needed about $300,000 to finish major construction to get the depot pretty much done. We still need more money to do the finer details like landscaping and some of the other stuff, but to get the major construction pieces done was about 300K. And so about 290 to 300K. So this helped. And the family to date has donated about $1 million of the $1.9 million we've spent so far. We have reached an agreement with a tenant, commercial tenant. Um, I can't say what the commercial tenant is, but we are reached a tentative agreement on lease terms with this tenant, and the press release is going to happen at our annual membership meeting, which is to come in the end of April and early May. And if you want to join a membership, it is available to join at thecheneydepot.com, or you can ask me directly. The Save Our Station brand has served its purpose. Right now the building is preserved and we've done doing the preservation part. We needed a building that will now allow us the opportunity to basically talk about the future, right? So the future being, okay, what happens after the building gets preserved? The tenant goes in, everything opens. What's next? So that's what we're doing right now as well. And we're also in the process of sourcing a baggage cart. The baggage cart is not only useful for public display, but if a tenant goes in there and wants to display anything, it is another way of advertising. And then finally, we got to finish the last of the interior and exterior work so the tenant can move in and do whatever it is they need to do. So that's the remaining outlets, it's the remaining exterior, that's all that stuff. This is the new logo, the Art Deco style logo that we have designed to replace the existing logo. And this will be part of the new brand that we're going to talk about in our annual membership meeting, which will discuss the future of the depot. One of the things about this logo is that we wanted to keep it sort of themed to the 20s, but yet showcase the future. So again, the theme had been preserve the history, but showcase the future. And so we decided to do a modern take on the depot and the tracks, but used an Art Deco design to kind of bring it back into the 20s. Here's a night photo. Now that the lights are on, they do come on at night, and if you drive by the depot, this is what it looks like. And I gotta tell you, it looks wonderful to see that we finally have lights on the building, it's finally lit, and it finally looks somewhat appropriate. I'm imagining there'll be more lights added and more things later, but for now, this is what it looks like. Finally, I just want to say that this presentation is dedicated to Dr. Pete Hansen. His incredible financial contributions is what has allowed the Cheney Depot Society to continue the good work of historical preservation. May he rest in peace. Any questions for me? I guess, Mr. Fisher, is it time now to do Q&A?
Well, yeah, actually, George, there's been quite a bit of interesting dialogue in the chat, and Jill and
Wow.
Jennifer, to everyone, thank you for answering the questions to our group as those questions came up. One of the questions was, is it a masonry building or a wood frame? Another question was, how far in footage did the building move? I understand it's about 1,500 feet, something like that.
Yeah, the building moved wasn't that far. I want to say it's like 1,500 feet. It wasn't that far. It was the other thing too, right? With moving a building of this size, it costs money to move. So the other thing with site why the first in Union Street was great was because it was only about 2 blocks down the street, really. And it was wonderful because when you're that close, it means that I can move the building in one piece because the town of Cheney doesn't have big streets. Okay, it's a very small town, doesn't have big streets. So if you're going to turn a building in a very tight corner, right, it's going to be a pain in the rear end to do if you move it anywhere else. If you can move it close to where you are and you don't have to turn a building in a very tight corner, then you can keep the building in one piece, which keeps its structural integrity, which keeps the history. Because cutting up a depot in half and re-gluing it together is not only destroys the integrity of the building, but it also sort of destroys the history part of the building too. And finally, the building will just never look the same if it's not in one piece.
There you go. Yeah, you can't put Humpty back together again.
Mhm.
From the audience, Linda Hackbart, I saw you unmuted yourself. Did you have something you wanted to add? Maybe not. Trent asks, are there plans to provide some type of historical display exhibit?
Okay, let's talk about that for 2 seconds,
All
okay?
right, there you go.
So there will be displays throughout the depot that will talk about its history. Okay, and one of the things is a commercial tenant, so we're going to work with them to utilize the space on the walls, the operator's desk, and some other spots to highlight history. Obviously, can't interfere with I can't interfere with their business. I won't tell you what specifically kind of. I can't tell you the business name and what they provide specifically. I can only tell you that it will be a food service of some kind. I can't disclose the details of what kind of food service or that. Just that it's a food service. Period. So with that being in mind, we have to think about how can we display something that'll represent the history of the depot and all the artifacts without interfering with the food service part of the deal, right? And there have been some other depots, if you look at like, what is it, Laurel? Is it Laurel? Is it Livingston? One of the two has a nice, breakfast place inside the depot. So they've done it quite well. Ours will be a little bit different in that we're going to want to have, theirs has a lot of just pictures and stuff, not really a lot of sort of, interaction pieces. Ours may have part interaction, part history. So we're looking into, again, how we can utilize the space to develop that and what that's going to look like, right? Because ultimately, that's really how it's going to be.
All right. Well, that's a good explanation. And Wayne Monger, Cascade Rail Foundation board member with me. Wayne, I just gotta ping you for a second. I mean, we know depots are tons of fun. What do you think about all this? Can you unmute and what are your thoughts?
I'm just amazed. What a fabulous project, and how well you did that, how planning everything else, and that all the dealing with the underground toxics. That's good. Matter of fact, question is, did they leave those underground tanks intact down there? Do you fill them with concrete or something,
No,
or
but
were they
here's what we had
removed?
to do. We had to pull the tanks out.
Okay, you did pull the tanks out.
We had to
Okay,
pull the tanks out,
I was
correct?
thinking.
Because
Okay,
if those tanks ever leaked again, we'd have problems. That's on us. So we didn't. We wanted to
yeah,
get them to stop leaking. But then, because
yeah,
because we had to raise the ground up by so many inches to be street level, right? That's because if we touch the soil, you have to clean it up. If you touch it, you got to clean it up. If you don't touch it, you have to clean it up. So we were able to get the
right.
Department of Ecology to agree that if you raise it by so many inches off, that you didn't have to touch the soil. And they said,
I know
okay.
in other states that, like here in California in the past, that had underground tanks that had been abandoned that you can actually go in, clean them out, fill them with concrete, make certain they're completely clean, fill them with concrete, then just leave them in place. But
The
that way
real
you have
problem,
to document that
the real problem for
they're
us,
clean.
the real problem for us is that Cheney is a small town, and on the outskirts of town is a nature preserve and all kinds of other wildlife things, and so it was just better to just take it out and then just raise the ground up than anything else. Really, that was the answer. With all the nature preserve and all, the leaving it in the ground would just cause more problems than it was worth.
Oh yes, definitely, definitely. But a fabulous presentation. The well detailed, and it's almost like a blueprint for other organizations that are facing the same thing about.
I will say this that Dr. Hansen was wonderful in chipping in all the money he has, and I have to tell you, that's probably if there's anything that I would say we got lucky on, and that is his 1,900,000 some odd thousand, like his $1 million. I have to we have to remember that most organizations don't just get $1 million, okay, to do this, okay, and most people don't have $1 million, okay. So the fact that he not only A had the money and B wanted to do it, right, is just a blessing for us. And there's going to be something in the depot with his name on it for sure, because he is without question, the largest financial contributor to the project, and what allowed us to really do a lot of. Remember, when we started the project, there's a lot of early planning, early designs, early engineering stuff that we had to do, like very early stuff. That all costs money, and if you don't have money for some of those early drawings, designs, engineering, right, you can't do the rest of the stuff. So the fact that he chipped in large sums of his money early to help with the initial designs, studies, things that really allowed us to develop into what is now is really hard. Like, it's hard to quantify the importance of that.
So, George,
Okay.
does your society or association 501c3 nonprofit own the
Yes,
building? And there's nobody else that's got their fingers in the deal other than you guys then, right?
we are a 501c3.
And you're the
We're
property owner.
we own the property and we own the building.
Wow,
One of the
fantastic.
other. So by the way, the hardest part for me as a social media guy, because I was running the Facebook and I was involved, was between the time we had decided on the property and we had looked at enough things to know what we needed to do next on the property, right? We planned our next steps to actually doing the work. That was 2.5 years of misery, because the 2.5 years were spent waiting on Texas, specifically BNSF HQ, to get back with us and say you can have the building, because the owners wouldn't donate the land if we didn't get the building. That was how they wanted it structured. So it meant that I couldn't do anything on the land until the building was donated. So then it had to happen all at once. And waiting for the railroad to say yes, was waiting for bureaucracy, was a pain in the rear end. And I gotta tell you, 2.5 years of calling every month was this like, what is, was like, and keep hearing the same answer is like, it really got kind of boring quick. And I was just like, I know how bureaucracy works. I know how this kind of stuff works, but man, it's felt like forever. However, the minute we got the building and that stuff was signed over, the rest all happened so fast. It was like, holy crap, like the rest is happening. Like, wait, this is happening? But the 2.5 year wait time was misery, because
Especially
all
if
the
you're a
parts
social
were,
media guy and as verbal as you are. Yeah.
oh, just trust. It's not even
Gonna
just that.
hold your breath all that time.
It's just waiting, right? Because you're waiting for BNSF to basically get the legal to approve everything to get it. And one of the other challenges too was remember, the depot in its original place had a boiler, and the boiler was not to be moved with part of the building. And BNSF almost wrecked it for us because they wanted us to foot the money to clean up the boiler.
Ah,
And that would have been easily millions because of what's in the boilers and just how it goes. And so the fact that
And what's
we
around the boiler?
Yep. And so the fact that we were able to avoid that in the contract negotiations was a miracle. Really, that was the other. I'm really amazed that we were able to avoid that.
George Foster, you had your hand up a minute ago. George, go ahead, please.
Well, I noticed some things that were kind of similar sounding with the name of what the depot was named from, Benjamin P. Cheney. Is that
Yep,
correct, George?
that's correct. He was a board member for the MPRR, and the town is named after him. And the original schoolhouse that is now Eastern is called was named after him. The academy was named after him as well.
Okay. And coincidentally, similar name, there was a lumber magnate in Tacoma and the whole Pacific Northwest. If anybody knows the history around Tacoma, Benjamin B. Cheney, who I was acquainted with just out of high school. And um, I thought they might have been related, but uh,
Well, I've never researched that to find out if they are. I just know that he was a board member in the MP, and that's how it happened.
yeah, because Ben B. Cheney uh, was the one that brought the AAA Tacoma Giants to our town there.
I mean,
And
Cheney
yeah, so
Stadium, of course. I
like I
didn't even
said, it
think of
just
that.
maybe a coincidental name, you know.
yeah, I mean, I'm sure they're related somehow. I mean, but you have to remember though, when you're in Eastern Washington, there's a lot of obscure names and things like that. See, in the cities, it's harder to know who your history is. In Eastern Washington,
Exactly.
you might be connected, so it's very likely. But then also, the eastern part of the state is big, so it's you know, and people own the land.
George, so Trent wants to know, is this a standard Northern Pacific design? Why don't I see other
So
Spanish?
let's talk about this. As I said
Yeah,
before,
yeah.
there's only two other depots outside of the Southwest that are like this. One is in the Dakotas. Remember, so the depot is not standard MP, but the mayor wanted something unique that would attract people. And if you build a standard MP and it looks like the one in Seattle, Tacoma, wherever else, then you don't attract people in business. If you're unique, you attract people. So if I build something that doesn't exist up there and says wow to people, maybe they'll come visit. So that's why this design is used, is he had hoped to attract more commercial business. And while that worked, it did not allow for it worked in getting more business, but unfortunately it was never enough to get Cheney back to its heyday, which was in the late 1890s up into the early 1920s.
All right. Outstanding presentation, George. You promised me a great presentation, and sure enough, technical difficulties notwithstanding,
Mm-hmm.
you delivered, didn't you? Yeah,
Yep.
very nice. Very
And
nice.
then one last thing, this
Yeah.
photo I have up now is a conceptual drawing of what it'll look like when it's done. We've kind of put together what we think the landscaping will look like and that type of a deal. Of course, there's still a lot to be done. Sometime next month, the station signs are going to get built, and then sometime this summer, they're going to paint the monad up there. And we think we can get away with it without needing to ask BNSF for their permission because the MP monad is very similar to a yin and yang sign. So we think we can get away with it, but we'll have to find out. And then the anticipated idea is that by November this year, we'll be able to open this part of the building up for the general public. We'd like to do it sooner, but this is a factor of money, availability, and construction schedule. And also, there will be a water tower installation that will happen probably in the near future on there too, and that'll be strictly a viewing platform. So where we'll have the water spout and such face the street as if it were like a railroad operation, but open up the back half of the water tower as a viewing platform.
There
And
you
there'll be rail
go.
fan cameras and stuff. And since the main line is very busy, this should be a nice attraction. I'm probably not going to get rich doing that. I'm probably not going to get tons of extra visitors doing that. But it is nice to just have it up there, as it were, because when you're next to a railroad and it's this busy, that's very minimal cost in terms of sharing it. And it also adds another public sort of playground or very sort of right that you can have. And so overall, that'll be the next steps too.
All right. Well, very good. And so a couple things before we wrap up. If you're new to the program today and you like this sort of programming, drop your email into the chat, and I will add you to our list for future programs. Next program 2 weeks away will be board president, George mentioned him, Russell Holter, who will be talking about the How Cascade Rail Foundation, and we have our own depot got started, and so that'll be coming up in 2 weeks. And let's see here, Wayne Monger, I owe you a phone call after today's meeting, so just forewarned, I'm going to give you a call. And George, any last thoughts before I let you go? Because we're going to wrap up.
Nothing really, but just visit the Facebook page and keep an eye out. There will be likely a mention of some big news coming this summer. And so those of you who would like to attend, that'd be great. And Mr. Fisher, I know you live in the area. When I know the dates of the big day, you have been invited already, but that's
Oh,
notwithstanding.
yeah, I
But
appreciate
that's not been, and
appreciate
that's
that
really
very
for, and
much.
Russell too. If Russell, I know Russell will want to invite as well because he was a part of our organization for a little bit. So so I just wanted to say that Mr. Holter and you will be invited, and if I can do it right, I'm aiming for a big giant group photo with all the volunteers, all the people. I mean, this will be like the biggest. I'm trying to have a phenomenal group photo, but we'll see if the winds coordinate on getting that many people together in one place.
Well, Wayne, I mean, Wayne Monger and I have only been in the depot business for a little over 20 years, and I'm looking at this going, wow,
Yeah.
I've learned a
you
few
know,
things.
just to tell you, Wayne, it's interesting, to be perfectly honest, I did not know what I was getting myself into when I started in 2014. I just thought this was a cool project to be on. And here I am 11 years later thinking, A, what the hell happened to time? And B,
Well,
holy shit. And three, holy shit.
there you go. Well, depots are tons of fun, as we like to say.
Yes, they are.
Yep. So, all right, everybody. Well, thanks everybody for being
Hmm.
here, and we worked through all of our difficulties. Special guest George Lee. George, I suspect you'll be back in about a year, talking about all the cool things that have happened since the last time we
Either that,
were
and
together.
yep, we'll talk.
Yeah, we'll talk
Alrighty.
then. All right. So, on behalf of the Pacific Northwest Railroad Archive and Cascade Rail Foundation, your host and moderator Jonathan Fisher, saying thanks everybody for being here. Look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks. And let's go out and enjoy the beautiful day. I'm not going to do the weather today, but I can tell you in West Seattle, it's the nicest day that we've had since the last ice age. So there you go, everybody, and have a great day. And we'll look forward to seeing you all soon. Thanks again for watching, and bye for now. This, by the way, will be on YouTube later on today, along with Frank Zellerhoff's first presentation at Vashon last Saturday. So anyway, one last advertisement before I say bye for now, everybody. Jack, good seeing you. Best of luck on that toilet situation, okay? You're muted, Jack. I muted you earlier, so you have to unmute. So, all right. Well, there we have it. Trent, thanks as always. Craig, good seeing you. Joel McCurry, it was great seeing you guys. Thanks everybody for being here. So I've got to go, and bye for now.